So my point to you in giving you this, I'm gonna give you a little bit more interaction on each of these levels in a moment here. But my point of view in giving you this is, again, to help you see that where you deal with people is largely what's most apparent to you in the counseling room when they come in and they're telling you their story. What's most apparent is this stuff, not this stuff, okay? People are going to be telling you, they're going to make statements about the situation that reveals the way they're interpreting it. They're going to talk about how they're feeling about their situation. They're even going to tell you about the series of choices that they made and how they reacted and responded. They exist and operate with this relative level of consciousness. But what you have to do as a counselor is start to get backward a little bit. Get deeper a little bit into what their hearts are actually doing, what might be characterizing their hearts. Okay? So let's talk about each one of these categories a little bit further for you. Okay, let's start with cognition here. All experiences are interpreted experiences. Okay? People can't help but try to make sense out of the things that are happening to them. And the way they make sense out of something, the way one person makes sense out of something, another person can have an entirely different interpretation of the circumstance. And that will then reveal what the belief structures are. Let me give you an example of this. Okay? So there was a time when we went to a family reunion, and it was around the fact that one of my nieces was about to go overseas for the last time. So my sister, my niece's mom, she was the one hosting the party. And she was milling around and just making sure everyone was cared for, and she was sort of not frantic, but you know how it is when someone's hosting a large party and she's just moving to and fro and making sure everyone's cared for. She was serving us very well. And so we just noticed that, she wasn't very relaxed. She was somewhat frantic. Her oldest daughter is about to move overseas and all the rest of that stuff, okay? So we later were with a couple other family members who were also there at this party. And one of this family members was talking to my wife about that party. And this family member said, "Did you see the way your sister was just frantically moving around the whole night? How unable to relax she was? Did you see that?" And my wife acknowledged, "Yes, I did see that. I noticed that as well." Okay? So, both of them both saw the same situation. Okay? So the raw data of the situation was apparent to both of these people. Okay? So then this relative says to my wife, "You know why she was that frantic, don't you?" And my wife said, "No, well, I would have a guess. I actually think she was frantic because, she wanted to make sure everyone was really well cared for, on top of just the pressure and the sadness of the fact that her daughter's moving across the world. Like, that's really hard. But, I appreciated the way she served us." This relative said, "Oh, no, that's not why she was frantic. She was frantic because your parents were there. And your parents make her so nervous. I'm telling you, whenever your parents are around, they are just like dour, and they're so picky that she was scared of displeasing them." Okay? And my wife's response to that was, "I don't think that at all. I think she was just sad that her daughter's about to leave," right? So, conversation ended, whatever. But here's my point to you. This is an analysis here. Why did my relative interpret the exact same situation so differently than the way my wife interpreted the situation? Why? Their different interpretations show a different structure of active beliefs that were going into the perception of the situation. What did it reveal about my relative's belief sets? Actually, let's start with my wife. We love my wife. She's so great. What belief structure was leading into my wife's interpretation of that situation? Yeah, that's right. My wife believes in the servant-heartedness of my sister. My wife also is interpreting it as a mother herself who can relate the experience of, if my daughter were leaving to go overseas, I would also feel sad and kind of throw myself into just the service of the people in that. So that was her interpretation of my sister's motivation. What did it reveal about my relative's belief structure that she was using to interpret that situation? That's right. That relative has some serious issues with my parents, okay? In other words, I think what that revealed is her perception of my parents is that they're really picky and dour and difficult to please, right? Because she was interpreting my sister's actions in light of that established structure of belief. So, here's my point to you. In counseling, the way people represent situations and describe them is their interpretation. You never get pure facts in counseling. Did you know that? You never get pure facts. That's not an evil thing. That's not a wrong thing. It's just the fact that we're all subjects. We all have to have a certain perception of things. So as they're describing it, that's a great avenue to getting deeper into what do they believe, what are their active beliefs about the world, what do they perceive. So the example I give to you there, in the book, but also in your notes there, is, this one's kind of funny. Do you have it there in front of you? The cognitive heart responses? Okay. So, situation, a relatively simple situation. I'm rushing out of the house. Your wife pours you, or your husband, or your roommate, whatever your situation, pours you a glass of orange juice. How you respond to a glass of orange juice being poured will reveal the deeper structures of your heart. Okay? So let me give you two scenarios, all right? You know how everybody's posting articles all the time on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, like new health article, like this is what you got to believe, essential oils or homeopathic or just all the rest of the stuff. Well, guess what? There's plenty of articles on orange juice, okay? Some articles you post on orange juice say, orange juice is the secret to health. The Greeks lived for 150 years each because they drank orange juice, right? And if you drink orange juice, the vitamin C will transform the entire genetic structure of your body, and you will never be sick again, okay? Then other articles you read that moms like to pass around, do not give orange juice to your children. It is so full of sugar, you might as well give them a Snickers bar. You actually might as well give them 4 Snickers bars in the morning. There's so much sugar in that, it's just blah, 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 right? Okay, so we have these competing views of orange juice, all right? Whatever article you just read last, or whatever article you were most convinced by, will go deep into your belief structures, okay? To the point where if you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to be healthy and your spouse or loved one or roommate pours you a glass of orange juice, you will interpret that act according to what you believe about orange juice, okay? This sounds silly, but it's really remarkable how accurate it can describe our reactions, right? So the example I have there is, if I believe orange juice is bad for me, and I believe that it's my duty to take care of my body, and I believe that my wife is supposed to help me be responsible in the care of my body, then her pouring a glass of OJ is a hostile act against my health, okay? That's how I'm going to interpret it. And I'm going to get snippy with her, like, babe, why are you pouring me that? Give me some water. Give me some coffee. Aren't you considerate? Don't you know that I would love to drink that, but I can't drink that, so stop tempting me, right? That's how you're going to respond, okay? Your interpretation of her action there shows the beliefs that you have, even about something as silly as orange juice, okay? But people's interpretations of events and relationships in their lives, it's very important. How do they talk about what happened to them, maybe in a past situation? What offends them or causes them discouragement when things happen in life? What angle do they tend to take in describing the particular problems that they face? What narrative do they attach to it when they lose their job, or they lose their child, or they had a conflict with their spouse? The way people interpret their experience is a direct route into what they most believe about the world. So, that's the cognition. Affections. Affections. As we said, our feelings are always expressions of desires. So people feel their wants. That's how you can say it. People feel their wants. Why do people experience fear when the doctor tells them that the biopsy revealed cancer? Why do they feel fear at that? It shows they're wanting something. What are they wanting? Yeah, they're wanting health and by extension life. Okay? Why do they feel relieved when the doctor tells them that there is not cancer in the biopsy? Yeah, they're wanting the exact same thing. The same value expresses itself in different emotions according to the different situations. Do you see that? So, our feelings are expressions of our desires. The same desire for bodily health reveals itself in different ways. So emotions are the surface expression of these deeper desires. Okay? So here's how I want you to think about emotions in counseling. They're an excellent gauge of desire. You know what a gauge is? A gauge is an instrument of measurement. So you have many gauges that you interact with regularly. If you drive a vehicle, the main gauge that you're looking at is your speedometer or your tachometer if you're like really into cars, or your gas tank. Okay? The gauge isn't the reality. The gauge just tells you about the deeper reality. Okay? About how fast you're going or how much gas is in your tank. So it is, feelings are an excellent gauge. They're a bad guide. They're often a very bad guide. Sometimes they're a good guide. They're often a bad guide, but they're a great gauge as to what it is that you're wanting. Okay? So negative emotion generally displays the perceived loss of something that you desire. Okay? And positive emotion generally displays the perceived reception of something that you're wanting. Okay? Just generally speaking. And if anybody wants to grow up and do a PhD on doing a theological categorization of different types of emotions, let's talk. Okay? But my point to you is this. This is just a really helpful tool in your counseling. It's actually a helpful tool in your own spiritual life. When you're feeling something, sometimes you're feeling down. Sometimes you're feeling anxious. Sometimes you're feeling angry or embittered. You know what step number one to do is? Stop and before the Lord, ask yourself the question. Ask God to help you with the question. What am I wanting here? What am I wanting? I'm feeling this. What does it show that I'm wanting? And if you can identify it, you've taken a step closer to being able to submit that to the Lord and discuss it with Him and talk to Him about it. And allow Him to sort of arrange it back within the framework of values and desires that He wants prioritized. Right? So think about anxiety with the first week of the semester, right? You all felt that last week. You probably are still feeling it. I felt it every semester, every time. In fact, I still feel it, okay? But you look at the workload that you have, you start feeling this choking, overwhelming, sort of creeping anxiety. What are you wanting in that moment? Could be a number of different things. Not everybody's going to be the same, okay? But what was helpful for me as a student is to realize what I'm wanting is not just, I'm hoping to do a good job. I want to do a good job. Okay? I think that's a good desire. But part of what I was wanting too is I was wanting to not have as hard of a semester as I had. I don't want to put forth the effort here. That's hard work. I don't like that idea. And even being able to identify that and just submit that to the Lord and say, God, help me to be happy to do what you're calling me to do. I trust that you're going to help me lift what you want me to lift, and you're going to help me know what not to lift up. And that process is how you then deal with your anxiety, okay? So it's not just, Lord, forgive me for being anxious. I shouldn't fear. I should trust you. That's great. You should say that, and you should trust God. But I'm saying, trust him not just with the feeling, trust him with the desire that it reveals, okay? So look at your handout there. Let's look at the anatomy there. So in this situation, a far more serious one than the last one, the situation is the death of a child. The death of a child. How one feels about that reveals the values or the desires that are deep in their heart. So even if you didn't have this diagram here, you could guess how parents would feel at the loss of a child. What's the number one thing that comes to your mind? Sorrow, sadness. Something that they desperately wanted, they don't have. At least not in the same capacity, in the same way. But you might be surprised as you actually ask into the experience of parents who've lost a child that it's not just sorrow oftentimes that they go through. Everybody's different. But oftentimes it's not just sorrow. There's also fear. There's also fear. There's also even maybe a little bit of anger. And that particular sort of cocktail or mixture of feelings will trace back to a mixture or a cocktail of desires, right? So the sorrow and the loss is often just simply, the desire behind it is the child herself or himself. They're sad that they no longer get to hold and touch and kiss something that they deeply value. Maybe the fear and the anger come from something else, though. Could come from maybe the realization that the loss of a child forces you into that this world is a dangerous place. And this world has no guaranteed safety. And this world is broken. And so, before the loss of a child, you can kind of have this illusion that everything can kind of go relatively happily in life. Things are relatively put together. But then when you lose a child, that illusion is totally dissipated. And it can create fear. Why anger? Why anger, you think? Yeah. That's right. It could be anger directed at God. It could be anger directed just generally at the circumstances, which eventually has very clear implications on their understanding of God. Sometimes it's at themselves. Sometimes it's at the people that maybe allowed their child to be in a vulnerable position. Maybe doctors that they perceived didn't do a good enough job, right? But all of it can be a revelation. This anger can be a revelation of this deep value of a world that these things shouldn't happen. And by tracing those feelings back to desires, that's how you really can help parents in those situations. Because then you can ask the question, what does God think about those values? What does God think about those desires? Does he share the same value? And what might be surprising to many parents is that their grief is actually an appropriate response to the loss of their child. Why? Because God agrees with the value of the life of their child, and therefore their grief is legitimate. God agrees with that too. There's a very real sense in which, don't believe me, read Romans 8. There's a very real sense in which God's grief parallels ours, or actually parallels is the wrong word, as if it just sort of comes alongside, but God's grief justifies ours. He grieves with us when the object of our value that's being revealed in our grief fits into His framework. God values the life of that child actually more than the parents do. So there's resonance that can come there. That's a very powerful thing. And what about the desire for a world that's not broken like this? A world that's not dangerous anymore? Does God agree with the value of that? Absolutely. How do we know that? Read Revelation 21 and 22. That's the world that He's making. That's the world that He's going to. So there's a sense in which the fear and the grief that they're experiencing, and even the anger, never anger directed at God, that's never justifiable, but the anger of living in a world where children die, even that, in some sense, can be a good and a healthy response when the value being living in a world that's not broken, when that's submitted to God's timing and God's ways, not a demand on my own terms and in my own ways. Does that make sense? So that's how you help. We could say much more on this, and we will, but I'm trying to give you a vision for that's how we help parents or anyone process very strong emotions as we trace it back to the value, and then we ask the question from a biblical framework, what does God say about that value? Then we'll know what He says about the emotion that is being expressed. And just for time's sake, because we're running out, let's jump to the last one here, the volitional aspect of it. Okay? Choices always are the expression of deep commitments. So the diagram really is just the story that one of my dear friends tells publicly, and he has a blog post about it, about his father. You might have heard it before. I have a friend whose dad died, I believe, in a training operation for the Marines. And after his death, I think it was actually a couple days or weeks afterwards, one of the fellow squadron members of his dad in his dad's group came up to his mom and he handed her a photograph. And the photograph was kind of an awkward photograph, actually. She looked at it, and it was just sort of this hazy, weird photograph of a bunch of guys in sort of a small room. They were all Marines, and they were all looking off camera somewhere and like sort of celebrating and yucking up and having a good time looking off camera. But way in the back of the picture, there was one guy who almost you look at the picture, he almost looks like a little boy because he's covering his eyes and he's turned away like this. When she's handling this picture, the guy says, the guy in the back with his hands over his eyes, that's your husband. And what was going on was that was the night we all got pinned with our wings, and we were all celebrating together, and we brought in strippers for the show that night. And your husband was the only one with the guts to turn away and not to watch. And I think as the story goes, he said, we all respected him for it, but none of us had the guts to do that. What did the choice of that individual in the moment reveal about the commitments that structure his heart? Okay? He was more committed to honoring his God and to loving his wife and preserving his affections for her than he was even to his squadron around. Think about the social pressure of that. Think about what a dork you look like if you have to act like a baby who can't even watch a little strip show. What's the big deal in the minds of the people there, right? And so what you see there is that the choices he made, if he would have chosen to participate there in the moment, what would that choice have revealed about the active commitment of his heart then? He would be more committed to not being the chump in the group, to bowing to the peer pressure around him. But the fact that the deepest commitments of his heart belonged to his wife and his God displayed itself intuitively in that moment. So when people come in for counseling, you're trying to help them make the connection. The decisions they make, the choices they make, do reveal the deeper structures of their heart. So it's not accidental why they're making choices. People will often say to you when you ask, why'd you make that decision? I don't know. Why'd you make that decision? I don't know. I just kind of did. We can't take that answer because it's not arbitrary. It's not random. These are moral agents who act. And so we say, I can see why you're saying that because it might be hard for you to understand it, but let's explore that a little bit. Because every decision you make flows from within you. It flows from your heart. So let's consider maybe what you are most committed to. So, it's time to land the plane here. Look at that last heart diagram in this section. My point there is just that it's all multifaceted. This is my attempt to just take all three of these things. I gave you separate examples for each one, but in this last example, it's just collapsing them all together and telling you that this is just one response. An interpretation involves feelings and choices, okay? So it's all one response. So that's where I give you the original illustration that I gave at the beginning of the last lecture, right? So this angry husband, okay? The situation was I didn't explain it to you earlier, but I do in the later chapter in this book here. The wife demands to know why the bank account is so low. That's the situation at hand. So he interprets that as, my wife is criticizing me. The associated feelings with that are anger and offense. And the choices he then makes are yelling, insulting, and threatening. Well, trace that back. What does that reveal about his heart? In terms of beliefs, he thinks his wife thinks I'm irresponsible and that she's better than me. That's what he believes about his wife. What he was wanting from her that led to his anger is I want respect from her as I define it. And how is he defining respect? That's right. You don't ask me that. That's not your business. You respect me. So he was wanting that version of respect. She didn't give it to him, and so that's anger. And then the choices he made in yelling reveal what commitment? I will get what I want here. And I will manipulate, and I will control, and I will put you under me until I get from you what I want. And if you still aren't going to give it to me, well, then I'm just going to throw my own pity party, and I'm going to go out to the bar, and I'm just going to escape from this for a while, and I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to get drunk at you because you can't control me, right? So you help this guy by tracing what's most apparent in his response back to what is less apparent within his heart. Make sense?